Welcome back to Millennial Meditations, everybody, and today we are taking another look at history of America that has been mostly forgotten by many people today. With that being said, let's get started. Today I will be telling the story of a woman by the name of Henrietta Wood. Henrietta Wood was born a slave, died a free woman, and had a hell of a life story to tell. So, let's start with the beginning of her story. Henrietta Wood was born in Kentucky sometime between 1818 and 1820 and was born a slave to the Moses Towsey family. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. Um, she was sold twice as a minor, once to a merchant in Louisville, Kentucky, and then to a French immigrant named William Sorode. Apparently to settle some kind of debt between Sorode and the first owner of Henrietta Wood. She then moved to New Orleans with Sorode after he was not felt very welcome by his neighbors in Kentucky. Must have been a real jerk to have to be ran out of town in Kentucky like that. Uh, At one point, William Sorode and his wife Jane separated, and Jane moved back to Louisville with Henrietta in tow. Um, Henrietta Wood was still enslaved by Jane, but she would contract Henrietta Wood out for domestic services to other people. Um, Jane and Henrietta eventually moved to Cincinnati, Ohio, just over the river. Um, because the city was seeing a lot of expansion at the time. Mrs. Sorode went to the courthouse after moving to Ohio and declared Henrietta Wood a free woman. Once she was freed, she went on to find employment for herself, but sadly this freedom was short-lived. Wood found employment at a boarding house run by a woman named Rebecca Boyd. Boyd took Henrietta on a trip to Kentucky, but this was all a guise. Boyd had a contact in Kentucky by the name of Zebulon Ward, who kidnapped Henrietta Wood and sold her into slavery once more. Sadly, Boyd and the driver she hired to take her to Kentucky were taken to court, but they were eventually acquitted of all charges. And this was in Cincinnati, by the way, in Ohio, not in Kentucky. In Kentucky, a case was brought up in court over the legal right of someone purchasing Wood as a slave, but the courts ruled that Henrietta was not a free woman. This is extremely sad. I mean, imagine if, say, you got married in Ohio and then moved to Kentucky, but Kentucky said, "Nah, we don't recognize Ohio's marriage laws. So you two are living together before married and are committing a crime." That's kind of similar, not exactly, but that would be a similar-ish way of looking at it. So Zebulon Ward eventually sold Henrietta Wood to a cotton farmer named Gerard Brandon. Brandon was trying to take advantage of the massive growth in the cotton farming in the southern United States. Wood eventually found herself in Mississippi, and during her time as a slave on a cotton farm, she gave birth to a son whom she named Arthur. Obviously, years passed at this point, and once Gerard Brandon heard the news about the Confederate forces losing control of the Mississippi River during the U.S. Civil War, he moved west and set up shop in Texas. Likewise, Wood and many other enslaved people owned by Brandon moved to Texas as well, and it wouldn't be until 1865 when Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, to announce that the Confederacy had lost the war and all the slaves were now free. This was mostly due to the fact that news traveled very slow at the time, and although Abraham Lincoln enacted the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, news of said Emancipation Proclamation wouldn't reach Texas for 2 more years, almost. Um, Henrietta hadn't forgotten about Zebulon Ward, however, and began to journey back east. By the way, to go back for a second, this is why June 19th is considered a federal holiday now for Juneteenth, because that was the day that that Major General Granger arrived in Texas, in Galveston, to announce that the South had lost the war and the slaves were now free. So just figured I would point that out since we are coming into the month of June, and that will be coming up in not quite 2 weeks from the time I'm recording this. So, after the Civil War, Henrietta ventured back to Ohio with very little money to her name. Ward, however, had been employed off and on during the war, but never really had a big career or anything like that. So for all intents and purposes, he was just another guy. But once back in Ohio, Henrietta filed a lawsuit against Ward on the charges of abduction, re-enslavement, can't talk today, and illegally selling her as a slave. Henrietta sued Zebulon Ward for $20,000, which is almost $480,000 today. So she was trying to get almost $500,000 from this guy, which, I mean, in my opinion, she was owed that and much more. I mean, she was declared a free woman, and then Kentucky said, don't think so. So finally, in 1876, a jury finally heard her case. 2 years later, Henrietta won the case, but was only awarded $2,500, almost a tenth of what she originally sued for. So she essentially got like 48 grand. So in looking at today's perspective, you would possibly buy a new Ford vehicle with that. Like, I don't think being re-enslaved is worth a new Ford Focus or whatever. Anyway, getting off track. Despite only receiving a tenth of what she originally sued for, her case was recorded at the time as the largest reparations awarded by a U.S. court, which was huge news at the time, and news of the case spread quickly around the country. This inspired many others to take up similar lawsuits, but many of them were never paid after the cases were won, simply due to laws that stated that defendants could just choose not to pay. So, yeah, I don't really see the whole point of, a court case if the defendant can, just not pay for what they did. Anyway, this ain't the video for that. So, after her trial, Henrietta Wood moved to Chicago with her son Arthur, and from all accounts that can be found, she led a pretty peaceful life after this. She worked as a laundress while her son Arthur worked odd jobs to help sustain the family. And later on in life, Arthur enrolled in law school and became an attorney. This isn't in any notes or anything I found, but it's probably due to seeing his mother go through the trial she did, and he probably thought, you know what, I can do something to help other people like that too. So hats off to Arthur and Henrietta too, obviously. I couldn't imagine going through the hell that they went through. Henrietta used her money from the lawsuit to help her son buy a home and fund his education. So that's about all that we know of her life. She passed away in Chicago in 1912, and her story helped inspire many others to seek reparations at the time as well. Likewise, her life story has raised the topic of reparations for many generations to follow, even up to current day society. So I found this story fascinating because I had never heard about this before. And I got a lot of information from freedomcenter.org, which is a museum in Cincinnati that has a lot of information about the Underground Railroad and how slaves were escaping the South and stuff. And I've never heard about this. And I'm a Cincinnati area native too, so it's like the fact that I have never heard about this before blew my mind. So I definitely learned something new today. If you did as well, let me know down in the comments below and share this with your fellow history buff, because this is an incredible story and it's one that I think more people need to hear about. So with that being said, guys, thank you for tuning in, and I will see y'all next time.